Thank you so much. Thank you, Stephen, for that introduction. My name is Jacqueline Leclair. I'm an oboe professor here at the Schulich School of Music at McGill University. And my colleagues are Avner Hartwick, who's starting his master's degree with us in bassoon performance. He completed his bachelor's in bassoon performance with us last year. And Rachel Camrett, who's a fine oboe student, beginning her doctoral degree with us in oboe performance. Yeah. So I cannot tell you how exciting it is for me to have my workshop of reed making stuff here for you to see. I'm thrilled to tell you about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let me get my script. I started playing the oboe when I was 8 years old, after starting on piano and recorder earlier. And I started making reeds, which are the mouthpieces we use to produce the sound. I started making reeds when I was 10 years old, which is unusually young for that sort of thing. And so it's always been sort of a part of my life. I feel like making reeds is just like doing anything you do, like brushing your teeth. I love it also, and I'm happy to show you more about it. What we're going to do today is briefly review the double reed family of instruments for you, explain the reeds that we use to make their sounds, and show you how we manufacture the reeds ourselves. Please save up any questions you have for later on. We'll have a question and answer period for you. But if anything I'm saying needs elucidation, please just put up your hand and I'll answer your questions, okay? Slide 2. Today, we're showing you the oboe, the English horn, the bassoon, and the contrabassoon. These are the most common standard double reed instruments of Western music. Also standard but less common are the oboe d'amore and the heckelphone. Don't get me started on the heckelphone. There also exists, but very, very rarely, the piccolo oboe or the musette oboe. They're very, very rare. And also, well, no, the heckelphone is the one I meant to say. I mixed it up. The oboe d'amore and the bass oboe are the ones that are a little bit more rare. You find bass oboe in something like Holst's The Planets or in some Broadway shows. And the heckelphone is very rare. There's only about 100 instruments that exist on planet Earth. There's only about 100. And you find that written by just a handful of composers, like maybe Richard Strauss, for example. Here we go. There also are some funny cousins we don't talk about, the bagpipes. I should also point out that the other cultures around the world, all or almost all, have their own double reed instruments. It seems obvious that most cultures or all cultures would have drums, musically would have singing, would have a simply made instrument like the flute. But it's also true that cultures all have their own kind of double reeds, which vary in size and shape and the kinds of reeds. These are the instruments that are the modern versions of the double reed instruments that were developed in Europe beginning in the mid-1600s. Next slide. All these instruments, you see, and the other ones I've mentioned, use double reeds to make their sounds. Double reed is what we call our mouthpieces, as I mentioned. The oboe is the smallest instrument, and the contrabassoon is the biggest instrument. So the oboe reed is the smallest one, and the contrabassoon reed is giant by comparison. As you can see with this, slide 4, as you can see with this bassoon reed close up, each reed consists of 2 thin pieces of dried cane that's been aged. The pieces of cane are pressed together so they can vibrate, producing the sound of the instrument. Even though these are modern instruments, the same kind of instruments you hear in chamber music and other professional concerts all the time, our mouthpieces are still made of handmade reeds that consist of fragile dried cane. They really haven't become modernized very much. There have been what's called fiber cane reeds that little kids would tend to play. Those have been around since about the 70s, but those never really been of a good quality. In recent years, a new kind of synthetic reed has been introduced. And those are of a higher quality. Some professional double reed and single reed musicians have started using them. The existence of these new synthetic reeds is a development in double reed land that is happening right now. And the future will tell what happens in that. Here's a photograph, slide 5. Here's a photograph of a synthetic oboe reed next to one I made the traditional way from cane. How the company manufactures these synthetic reeds, I could only begin to guess. But the process certainly would not include any of the equipment you see before me associated with making reeds out of cane. Slide 6. So now we're going to demonstrate what the reeds sound like. Here is an oboe reed, and this is what makes the voice of the oboe. This is the English horn reed. Where did I put it? Oh, here it is. It looks smaller than the oboe reed, but that's because it has this connecting bit called a bocal that is already connected to the oboe reed. So if I play it with the bocal, see, that's different. What does the bassoon reed sound like by itself, Abner? Okay. And what's the contrabassoon reed sound like? Okay. So if we take the sound maker and we put it in what's essentially an amplifier, the oboe, what does it sound like? That's the cane reed. Let's see what the synthetic reed sounds like. There it is. Nobody's going to vote for that one, right? And let's hear, oh, English horn. I'm going to stop moving that. Here's the English horn. And Avner, why don't you play a bassoon example for us? And then contrabassoon, with the biggest reed, the biggest instrument. How many feet long is that tubing?
The bassoon is about 8 feet long. Contrabassoon is pitched an octave lower, so I think
16.
The theory is right, about 16 feet long.
That's right. Fantastic, thank you. The exact cane, slide 8, the exact cane used to make double reed and single reed reeds is Arundodonax. It is traditionally grown in southern France, and it is also grown in other places in the world with similar climates. Here is a photo of our own Rachel collecting some Arundodonax from the wild with her uncle in Southern California. Arundodonax is an invasive species there. We could age it, but it probably wouldn't make good reeds because it wasn't grown to be of the high quality that we need to make musical instruments. Next slide. All reed instruments require Arundodonax that is very straight, it's very hard or dense in quality, and free from defects, no knots or anything, in order to function properly and sound well. Since the quality has to be very good in order for us to make good reeds to play, this cane grown in southern France and southern climates is grown by experts, much as grapes are grown to produce wine. The cane has to be perfect. Oboe reeds require Arundodonax that has a diameter between 9 and 11 millimeters, which looks like this. The larger the reed, the larger the diameter of the cane used. So while a piece of cane this size is perfect for oboe reeds, the cane used to make clarinet reeds and bassoon reeds and contrabassoon reeds are much larger in diameter. Slide 10, here's some Arundodonax for oboe that's been aged and sorted, ready to make reeds out of. Next slide. Professional quality reeds cannot easily be purchased. There are lots of people and companies who sell cane oboe reeds, for example, bassoon as well, but the quality is extremely variable. It is possible for an oboist or bassoonist to make friends with a professional who's a good reed maker and establish a relationship with that musician, buying reeds from that person one-on-one. But good quality oboe reeds cost about $25 to $40 each, and each reed will last only a few weeks if played regularly. Moreover, should something happen to that oboist who's making reeds for that other person, heaven forbid they move away, retire, or become otherwise indisposed, the supply of reeds is gone. Oboe reeds also change with the weather. Oboe reeds change with altitude. A reed that works great here will not work very well in Denver or Mexico City. Over time, they also age and stop working very well. So it's actually really important for an oboist or bassoonist to be able to use these tools to make and adjust their reeds on an ongoing basis. A reed that is wonderful today might not be very good at all tomorrow, even if I stay in Montreal. I know, imagine my life. How long does it take to become really good at making oboe or bassoon reeds? Conventional wisdom holds that by the time you filled a bushel basket full of reeds, then you could expect to become pretty good. Or some say that after making 1,000 reeds, you could expect to be competent. It takes a lot of experience. One of my students calculated how many reeds I have made over my lifetime, and estimating very conservatively, it's at least 10,000 reeds. And that's not counting English horn reeds, which I've made a few of, as you can imagine. Oboe reeds, since they are so tiny and thin, they last only a short time, as I mentioned, and an oboist has to be making them basically all the time. You can see I've got lots and lots of oboe reeds here. Next slide. You can see from this backlit oboe reed how extremely thin the tip of the reed is. You can understand how this paper-thin reed lasts for only a few hours of playing time. The bigger the reed, though, such as the English horn, bassoon, and contrabassoon, the longer they last. English horn reeds, even though they're not that much bigger, will last weeks more than an oboe reed, and even months. And a bassoon reed definitely can last for months. I imagine contrabassoon reeds could be handed down from generation to generation. Avner told me, that was yesterday I think, that his teacher, Martin Mangrum, who plays second bassoon with the Montreal Symphony, he made a contrabassoon reed at the Juilliard School in New York about 30 years ago, and the musician he gave it to is still playing that reed. That raises some other concerns as well. Next slide. How has double reed making developed over the centuries? In a nutshell, not much. Oboists and bassoonists in the mid and late 1600s in Europe were using the same kind of cane we use now, and they were using similar reed-making tools. They just didn't have all the machines I have here, but they were approximating the machines in simpler forms. Oboists in the 1700s and 1800s were using basically the same processes and equipment that I still use to make my reeds now. Now, if we asked a dentist how her profession, with its tools and practices, has evolved from the late 1600s to today, thankfully, she'd have a very different answer. The Baroque oboe on the left, as you can see, has only a couple of keys. The simple tone holes the oboist fingers cover to produce the different notes. The modern oboe on the right, as you can see, has elaborate key work, as all of the instruments up here do. This enables us to produce all the notes of the Western scales more easily and with more even tone than the oboes of the Baroque and Classical period and Romantic periods. The reeds for the earlier oboes, the ones on the left, were bigger in size and more free blowing. Reeds of the modern era that we're showing you, and we're going to show you how to make now, are smaller to fit the modern oboe's dimensions. And the small reed requires the oboist to produce high air pressure to play the oboe. Have you ever had to blow up those really small balloons for a party? Remember how you have to blow really hard to get the small balloon to inflate? That is pretty much what playing the oboe feels like. Next slide. So here is the really fun part. I'm going to show you how we make reeds. I'm going to take a tube of cane, and using this equipment, I'm going to show you how we do it. We have here a gouging machine. This is a splitter, a particularly medieval-looking device. This is a pre-gouger. This is a dial indicator for measuring the thickness of the cane. This is a knife sharpener. This is a gouging machine I use to make the piece of cane thinner. This is a clip-o-matic to clip the reed. I'm going to explain each one of these as I use it. This is a shaper tip. These are Band-Aids in case I cut myself. You're laughing now. Okay, are we good? Okay, great. So the oboist selects a, whoa, man down. The oboist selects a piece of dried cane and then trisects it like that. And then looks to find what is a straight section. It has no curves, no bends. We examine carefully. That looks pretty good. And then we use a guillotine to make the piece of cane the correct size. There we go. And then we make it a little bit thinner with a pre-gouger that works like this. Then we have a thinner piece of cane. Now we use the gouging machine. Get this a little bit wet. We putting the spring in place. I'm going to raise the blade, and we raise the blade, so I'm going to remove some cane to make it about 0.9 millimeters thick. There we go. But we need the piece of cane to be approximately 0.6 millimeters thick in the middle and about approximately 0.45 on the sides. So I'm going to lower the blade and lock it in place and run it through again. There's a curved blade that's removing the cane. There we go. And then the final run to get it down to about 60, 0.6 millimeters. Now I'm going to use my micrometer to see how thin it is in fact. It's a little too thick, so I'm going to lower the blade just a bit more. There we go. So that it's indeed 0.6 in the middle. Okay. And then I take the piece of cane and I fold it over a knife so that it's folded right in the middle. There we go. So now the piece of cane, that's how it becomes a double reed. One piece of cane becomes two sides. I'm going to put it on the shaper tip. Put it centered right in the middle. There we go. And then I'm going to grab a razor blade and carefully remove the cane that's outside of the shaper. And the piece of cane will be ready to tie on to make a blank. I'm going to use a knife to make the ends of the piece of cane a little bit thinner. The knives we use are special knives made for reed making. They're double hollow ground. And we buy a lot, if not all, this equipment from people who specialize in selling equipment to oboe players and all the double reeds. Then I'm going to take a staple. You can see these are staples. They're also called tubes. This is the small version of the English horn bocal. With oboe, we build the reed right onto the staple. So I place the piece of shaped cane on the staple, and then I take my ruler and measure to 73.5 millimeters. The staple is 47 millimeters in this case, so my finished length for the staple is going to be 73.5 millimeters. And in my world, a millimeter is a mile. From across the room, I can see if a reed is 1 millimeter too short. So now we use the thread. This is the same kind of thread they tie the eyes onto fishing poles with, you fishermen out there. And I carefully lash the piece of cane onto the staple. Make sure that the staple is in the middle of the cane. That seems to be centered. And now I'm going to roll up to be right at the tip, the end of the staple, and no farther. If I wrap it, I'm wrapping very tightly, and if I wrap it farther past where the staple ends, it'll squish the cane, technical term. And that would cause problems like raising the pitch in a bad way. So we're there, and now I'm going to cross over, and I'm holding, the thread is very, very tight. And now I wrap on 3 more, and now I'm going to stop and center everything. You can correct everything at this stage of the game and verify that all the measurements are correct. Okay, so that's correct. I'm going to check again, make sure I haven't overwrapped. Great. So now I'm going to wrap down to the bottom, and I'm keeping it, again, very, very tight. My colleagues who play flute, trumpet, French horn, tuba, they all have really, really stable mouthpieces, right? So even though we play reeds that are made of dried grass, we want them to be as stable as possible. So we endeavor to manufacture them with extreme consistency. I then tie this knot that my teacher taught me when I was 10 years old. It's actually a half hitch, I think. You Boy Scouts out there can verify. Okay, and now we have what we call a blank. I will cut the thread. So now you can see that it has ears, little bits poking out there at the top. We're going to cut off its ears. Doesn't hurt it. And then we start to scrape the cane. And a scraping technique, we're not whittling, we're not slicing, we're allowing the blade to engage the cane and then pull off a curl of cane. Again, the verb is scraping. And we remove the bark. There we go. So you remember that the piece of cane is 0.6 millimeters thick. So since it's consistently so, I know exactly how much cane to remove so that the reed will play properly. As I'll tell you at the end, toward the end of our presentation, the intonation of the oboe, bassoon, English horn, all rely on the reed, not adjustments with the instruments. Okay? And we continue to remove the cane until it's thinner in some places, like the tip, as you saw earlier, and thicker in other places. So now I will demonstrate to you what a finished reed sounds like. Hang on a second. Okay, if we could go to slide 16. If the reed is too thick, it won't vibrate easily enough. It'll just be too thick, like this one. It'll be really, really hard to play. It's not controllable. It's not finished. It's still too thick in all different ways. And if a reed is too thin, it would vibrate too easily. So let me show you what, it was next slide, slide 17. I'll show you what a reed that's too thin sounds like. I would not want to play this in a concert. It's not going to work. And this one's too thick, as I showed you, so let's find a good one. Where'd my good reed go, Rachel? Here it is. Synthetic one, right? The synthetic one. Oh, that's it. See, that's the thing with having too many reeds, you lose them. Well, I have a million here, so I'll grab a good one. Here's more like a reed I would play in a concert. It's a reed that is comfortable and I can play in a different variety of ways. And again, we've got the synthetic one. Which sounds different. Now, when it comes to tone quality, you already know this, but it's worth mentioning that tastes vary. And some people like a warmer or darker sound, and some people like a bright, more buoyant sound. And tone qualities vary nationalistically, traditionally, from France, a little bit brighter, Germany, a little darker. So that's an evolving thing, but each oboist makes the reed to sound the way they want to. Also, one would make a slightly different reed to play music of different styles. Sometimes a very quiet and soft reed is best, whereas some music needs to have a really wide, kind of sprightly range of dynamics. That would require a different reed. A reed for orchestra will have to blend well with the other instruments, whereas a reed I might play as a soloist could have a more distinctive or strong quality. Slide 18. The pitch or intonation of the double reed instruments is determined almost entirely by the reed, as I alluded to earlier, and only slightly adjusted by the musician as they play. So you know that the oboe tunes the orchestra. That's another detail we could get into. There's lots of fun details about the oboe, but I'll show you how we adjust the tuning. Here's just playing a note. But if I need to be a little bit lower, I'll move my embouchure out. But there's really only a sweet spot. If I had to move all the notes in or all the notes out to be higher or lower, it would be really uncomfortable. So you want a reed that is at one pitch level without needing too much adjustment, but we're always making little adjustments with the embouchure. Unlike the single reeds instruments, the clarinets, the saxophones, and also the flutes, all the flute families, unlike them, we can't really make our instruments longer and shorter to adjust. That's something that's pretty unique about the double reeds. I'll show you an example. This is a flute, and I'll play a note. and then I'll make the instrument longer, play the same note, and then play it in the same original position. And oboe can't do that. In an emergency, I could move my oboe reed out a little bit, but that causes some distortions. So we really are reliant on expert reed making to determine the intonation of the instrument as well. Now, Rachel and Abner and I would like to play for you one more piece. By the way, it's the same, from the same collection of Claude Gervais' compositions. It's a Galliard. After which we'll be delighted to take your questions. Thank you.